Hi guys, Dave here from Moss University. This first video on pivot tables and pivot charts is going to introduce you to what pivot tables are and how to create them. So let's get started. So on the screen we're looking at some data, and on that data we have an order date, a region, city, category, product, quantity, unit price and total price. And then we've got a bunch of data beneath that. And what I want to do is I want to analyze the data using a pivot table. Pivot tables allow you to slice and dice the data, to analyze the data. So let's see how we create one. I click anywhere on the data and then I go to the Insert tab, and I have two options here, Pivot Table or Recommended Pivot Tables. Indeed, over here on the pivot chart, which we're not going to do in this video, we also have the option to create a pivot chart and a pivot table at the same time. But firstly, we're going to look at how to create a blank pivot table. So I click on the pivot table option here. Now I'm asked, what data do I want to use to generate the pivot table? Well, it's already selected from A1 to H245 because I was using the data earlier on. But if you didn't have that here, you'd click into this table range and select the data manually. The other thing you can do here is that you can use a named range equally. You don't have to select the data explicitly. You can use a named range. Then I have to tell whether I want the pivot table to be on a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. I select the new worksheet and press OK. So now we're in the new worksheet, and over here we've got what are called pivot table fields. And you can see that the names here of the pivot table fields are generated from the data or the headings that were in the original source data. So we have order, region, city, and in the sales data, when I go back into it, you can see we have order, region, city, and so on. So those headings are very important. They're what generate the pivot table fields. Now, underneath that, we have four quadrants: filters, columns, rows, and values. And as you put fields into those quadrants, you'll see the pivot table being generated on the other side of the window. So let's put region in here because I want to look at the data from a regional perspective. Now when I do that, you can see that over on the pivot table, which is now being generated, I have east and west because they're the two regions that I have in my data. You've also got a heading that says row labels because this is a row. But I also want to see the data in relation to the cities that are in those regions. So I'll drag the city field into the row quadrant. And you can see now I have the cities in each region. So I've got Boston and New York in the east region, Los Angeles and San Diego in the west regions. And on the grid, on the four quadrants, I have those in my rows quadrant. I also want to see what quantity of product was bought. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the quantity down into this quadrant here, the values quadrant. That little sign there is the sigma, Greek symbol sigma, which stands for total. So it's indicating that you're going to sum up or total the data that you put into that quadrant. I'll also put the total price in there. Now I can drag it down or I can just click on the checkbox and you can see it appears automatically. So now on the pivot table, so far I have the region and the city, and I've analysed that in terms of the quantity that was sold and the total price of the quantity that was sold. When you do this, you'll see some of whatever the field is that you put into the values area comes up, some of indicating that it has totaled them. So that's the basic way that you create a pivot table. It's not that complicated. You can also go onto the quadrants here and drag things on and off. So for example, if I don't want the city to appear anymore, I can just drag it into the worksheet like that and it's gone from the pivot table. If I want to get it back, I just drag it back down. You can also change the order. So if I move region underneath city, you can see the way that it changes. That doesn't make a lot of sense, so I put region at the top level and then city is within that. If, for example, now I want to filter the data, so on the filters area here, I'll drag category down. And you can see on the pivot table, I have a filter called category, and when I click on the pull down menu, I can decide to select particular categories of product. So say I only want to see cookies and snacks. So I'll just select those two, press OK, and the data changes automatically. So that's slicing and dicing the data and generating a pivot table. It's not difficult to do once you know what you're doing. Now, when you have a pivot table on the screen, if you click off the pivot table, notice that the pivot table field list disappears, which can be a little bit confusing. But if you click back onto the pivot table, it reappears again. Also, when you have a pivot table selected, you have an extra ribbon here called PivotTable Tools with two tabs in it, Analyze and Design. And we're going to look at those in detail as we go through the series of videos. Now remember, subscribe to my YouTube channel and of course visit Moss University. I've put links into the description of this video which will allow you to have special coupon discount codes for all of our courses. Pivot tables in particular are very relevant to the Excel Expert certification exams, the 77728 and the MO201 exams. And they're actually quite a significant chunk of those exams. So it's really worthwhile to look at this series of videos. So, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. I haven't made it too complicated, but we'll go through all of the details with pivot tables and pivot charts in the series of videos in this playlist. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye.